You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hey folks, welcome to a special bonus for the projection booth. This is your host Mike White, and with me is Mr. Bob Murawski, who is talking about his work on so many things apart from The Other Side of the Wind. The rest of this interview is available on our Other Side of the Wind Redux episode, available now. So go ahead and enjoy the rest of the interview.
Where do you live in Michigan?
I am in Westland, so about midway between Detroit and Ann Arbor.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
And you grew up where, in the Thumb?
I was born in Detroit, but I grew up in a small town in the Thumb. It's called, Kindy for the most part, which is a town of 300 people. And then when I went to high school, we moved to Bad Axe, which is the county seat, which is 3,000 people. So it was a significant increase in, town size. And we had a local movie theater and a drive-in. So it was really moving up in the world.
How did you get interested in movies? Was it the theater?
Yeah, the theater, but mostly TV. And then, discovering magazines like Famous Monsters and The Monster Times and, those kind of old monster magazines from the 70s. I was always interested in movies just from going to see them at the drive-in with my parents. I think the first one I remember was like Planet of the Apes. We were probably still in Detroit at that time. But then living in a small town without a lot to do, looking forward to seeing movies on TV, either on, the Saturday afternoon, kind of creature features type shows, or the the CBS Late movie where they showed a lot of the old Hammer movies and a lot of the old AIP stuff and, those kind of things. I really started to become infatuated with horror movies mostly. And then, of course, getting a hold of magazines like Famous Monsters really, cultivated that love.
Well, it's one thing to love movies and love monster movies, but it's another thing to kind of make that your career. And I was curious how you made that transition.
I always knew I wanted to work in movies, even from the time I was a kid. And I shot some things on, Super 8, actually Regular 8 at the time. I used to collect those little condensed movies that you could buy at Kmart from companies like Ken Films and Castle Films. They were these silent 200-foot versions, which was like about a 10-minute version of a movie that was, even if it was a color movie, they were usually printed in black and white and they were silent. I collected a lot of the Universal movies and, 50s movies like War of the Colossal Beast and The Spider and those kind of cool things. But yeah, I always knew I wanted to work on movies, especially after reading magazines like Famous Monsters where they talked about the filmmakers and the behind the scenes stuff, and taught me that there was a side of people actually making the movies that I loved. So I shot a few things when I was a kid on, different, 8mm and Super 8mm. And then, once I graduated from high school, I went to Michigan State. By the time I got there, they had actually phased out their filmmaking program, unfortunately, and everything was video. But I still, got a major in telecommunication, which was video production. But there was a nearby college called Lansing Community College, and they still had a film program. It was taught by a guy named Bill Blanchard, who had worked for Disney in 50s and 60s, doing a lot of those kind of Wonderful World of Disney kind of nature documentaries and stuff. So he ran the film program, and they had really great classes. They were small. They only had an enrollment of 8 or 10 people in the class, unlike the gigantic classes at Michigan State. And you could always get your hands on the equipment and, the cameras and the film editing equipment and everything else. So, that was a big thing for me to be able to actually work on film, take those film classes at that community college while I was going to Michigan State. So between that and the stuff that I was doing at State, and at Michigan State, I ran a weekly film group where we showed old 60mm cult movies. Every weekend we would show something, we showed all the rock and roll movies like Decline of Western Civilization and DOA and Gimme Shelter, and we showed a lot of all the Russ Meyer movies and all the things like Eraserhead, and mostly just movies I wanted to see that weren't available because it was sort of in that early days of home video where a lot of things weren't even in release. So the only way you could see a lot of movies was renting them in 16mm. So we were showing them every week as part of a film group. So yeah, I was just dealing with film stuff the entire time, and so obviously with the desire to go into film at some point when I graduated.
It's so unusual to me that MSU was phasing out their film program, and I think you're only 6 years older than I am, and I went to U of M, and they still had a fairly robust film program. They were film and video.
Still did, and I don't know. Look, I don't why I didn't go to U of M. I still have no idea. But I had friends who had gone or were going to Michigan State, so that was a big part of it. In retrospect, I should have gone to U of M, but I didn't. But like I said, I got lucky because there was a neighboring community college that still had a great film program, and it was very hands-on. So I kind of made my own thing with the film group I ran, and the whole deal.
So why editing? Editing is always a very curious mix to me of technical and artistic, and I'm curious how you got into editing so much.
I just always liked it. It was a part of the process that I really enjoyed. When I was at Michigan State, we also had a TV show, and we would shoot punk bands that played, and then I would edit the material together for this weekly show that we had. And even working on those old 3/4 inch editing systems, I really enjoyed the process of taking a bunch of footage and really making it into a program. And even prior to that, when I was a kid with a movie camera, you quickly learn that a lot of your footage is bad. So at that point, it's just figuring out that you need to cut out the bad stuff to make it more presentable. But that kind of gave me my start as well. And then when I came out here to LA, a close friend of mine, this guy named Mike Ginesco, who I'd gone to Michigan State with, was working in editing on Sam Raimi's movie Evil Dead 2. So the first jobs I got when I came out to LA in 1987 were post-production jobs, because those were the shows he was working on, and those were the people that I knew, and I was able to kind of get my foot in the door working in the world of post. Now, if I had come out here and my friends were working in production, I may have gone that route instead. But it just kind of ended up like that, and I always liked the process. I like working on something and being able to complete it, work by myself, and actually in a more solo position where I'm sort of doing my own thing and calling all the shots and figuring it out, as opposed to being on a film crew where you're one of 100 people. So that might be part of it as well. And, working with the sound and the music and, everything, I just, it was just a part of the process that I sort of gravitated to, just because, I liked controlling all those elements and working with, all the elements and making it into a finished product, as opposed to, raw materials, which is, what you're doing if you're working on the film set.
What were some of those early gigs like? What were some of the films that you worked on?
The first movie was this, prison movie called The Destroyer, starring Lyle Alzado and Anthony Perkins, and I was on that for a few weeks, just helping out with some of the sound editing. They were building the tracks. At that point, everything was on film, so we were building sound units where you would go down and cut in a line of dialogue, and dialogue gets split out on all these different tracks, and you would end up with 30 or 40 reels of sound for the mix that would be used to mix down to one reel in the final product. But everything was built on these big reels of film back in those days. So yeah, I worked on that. I worked as an assistant on a movie called Danger Zone 2, which was directed by and starred this guy Jason Williams, who was famous for playing Flash Gordon in the X-rated Flash Gordon parody. And at that point, he was a producer, and he was making these sort of low-budget action movies. He was kind of like a low-budget Clint Eastwood kind of character. So he was doing these biker movies called Danger Zone. And I got on that as an assistant editor and worked for quite a while. Then, as a matter of fact, when he was going to do Danger Zone 3, the budget was a lot lower, and he offered me the position of editor, just because he knew I would, it would be a big step forward for me. So that was the follow-up to Danger Zone 2 was my first position as an actual film editor. Prior to that, I had worked as an assistant. As a matter of fact, I was actually at the time I was working as an assistant editor on Sam's movie Darkman, which was a really big Universal movie. But I quit that movie to go work on this really super low budget biker film, because it was an opportunity to actually be the editor. And so that was a big step forward. And actually, I quit Darkman and totally edited. I totally edited Danger Zone 3. We finished it, and Darkman was still going on, so I was actually able to come back and get my old job back because it was such a big movie that it was just still hadn't even been finished yet. That was actually a big break for me because I think Sam and his producer Rob Tapper and those guys really respected that I was willing to quit a big show to go do a little tiny low budget show, and ended up seeing the movie and hiring me to be the editor of Army of Darkness, which was the movie that they made after Darkman's. It was really fortuitous in a lot of ways, and I think they respected the fact that I was willing to work for a very low wage to kind of move up in position. And I think they thought I did a decent job on the movie, and the movie came up pretty entertaining. So they hired me to be the editor on Army of Darkness. So it was a big break for me.
Now, how did you get involved with Sam Raimi? Because I don't want to speak out of turn, but I think you've edited every feature that he's done since Army of Darkness. Is that right?
Well, not exactly. There was a point where we sort of split apart for a little while. So I didn't edit the baseball movie, For Love of the Game, which I don't think I would have wanted to anyway. I'm not a real sports fan, and even if it's the Tigers, which I guess it was. But and then Simple Plan, which I would have liked to have been involved with, then he hired the guys who had edited the baseball movie. But I think what happened after Army of Darkness, I think turned out great. But Universal didn't really care about the movie, and it was shelved for a year when we finished it because Universal and Dino De Laurentiis were in a lawsuit over Hannibal Lecter. Dino had made a movie called Manhunter with Michael Mann, and Universal was making Silence of the Lambs, and Dino was trying to claim ownership of the character. So anyway, Army of Darkness was a movie Dino produced and Universal was supposed to be picking up and delivering, but there was this horrible lawsuit between the two companies, and our movie was basically shelved for a year until everything got resolved. When everything finally got resolved and they ended up putting the movie out, they didn't really understand it or care about it. It was like an old property that nobody was really interested in at that point. So they just sort of pushed it out in February, didn't really promote it that much, and it didn't really do anything. So when Sam got an opportunity to make his next movie, which I guess was Quick and the Dead, so even before they had done Quick and the Dead was a big Columbia Pictures release, and he was just sort of brought on as into an existing project, and he basically said, "Look, I'm sorry I can't bring you onto this, but they just want me to hire people who've done a bunch of AIM movies." So we ended up not working on that, and then I ended up not working on the next couple as well. But then eventually I got back involved with him, and he was doing a TV show called American Gothic, and brought me on to do the title sequence, and then we ended up working together ever since. I did The Gift, which was kind of a low-budget thriller he was doing for Paramount, and then I ended up getting on Spider-Man, and have been on everything ever since. But so much of working in LA is people judge you from the work you've done or the position you're in. Until you actually make work on a larger budget movie, it's hard to get another one. But after doing Spider-Man, that just really opened up a huge amount of doors, because then I could really be able to be considered for anything.
Yeah, because that was, lest people forget, that was a huge hit when that came out.
People do forget, but it was actually the first movie to sort of break that $100 million opening weekend barrier. Because prior to that, no movie had ever really done it. And now when you think about it, seems like every movie that comes out makes over $100 million on their opening weekend. And if they don't, it just seems like a disappointment. But, Spidey 1 was actually the first one to do it. And, it was a huge deal. And, it got really good reviews. And then, it allowed Sam to have basically freedom when he did Spidey 2 to really, have free reign and, do whatever he needed to do and not be interfered with that much. Both of those movies were a really great experience because, they just, even the first one, they primarily left us alone and let us kind of make the movie we wanted to make.
Which is great, yeah. And that second one, that to me is still, and I'm not just blowing smoke up your ass, but that's still one of the best superhero films that is out there to me.
No, it's really good, and it's just it was really a testament to Sam, because after the first movie, he had the freedom to do what he wanted to do, and it was like totally his movie at that point. And then for whatever reason, the third one, after the success of the first two, because The second one, even though it didn't make quite as much as the first one did, it still made a lot of money. And critically, it was like, it got such great reviews. It was one of those movies that really like was such a critical success as well. But then when it came time to do the third one, everybody just thought that they were responsible for the success of the first two movies. And everybody just became mad with power and just really started to interfere with the project. I mean, from the producers to the actors to the, all the studio execs, and everybody was sort of like felt that they were the author of the other two movies for whatever reason. And Sam just really got kind of pushed out. A shame, because I mean, I think the third movie could have been just as good or better than the first, than the second one, in reality. But it just ended up becoming something that was like, didn't really make anybody happy at the end of the day, even though I think there's a lot of good stuff in it.
Well, I'm trying to remember with that one, a few years ago, something snuck onto Amazon. It was either like the producer's cut or the editor's cut. What?
Well, we did, yeah, it was just bogus. Sam wanted to call it the editor's cut. What happened was the studio was getting ready to put out a big box set because they had their newest Spider-Man franchise second reboot version that just came out like a year and a half ago. The third version of I can't remember, Homecoming, yeah. So they wanted to put out a box set of the three movies, and they wanted some additional material. Asked Sam if he would, give them some deleted scenes, which he never usually ever wants to do, because he just doesn't like for people to see the process, stuff that didn't work and stuff that we had cut out. So he emailed me and he said, "Well, what do you think about this?" He goes, "How I feel about giving stuff, deleted stuff, or animatics or anything." And I said, "Well, we should use this as an opportunity to sort of go back to an earlier version of the movie that we thought was better, before the studio really started interfering and before they made us do a bunch of reshoots to change things." I said, why don't we just kind of go back to an earlier cut, and at the same time, totally restore Christopher Young's original music, which had been mostly replaced because the studio thought it was too different and panicked and retracked a lot of the music and got rid of a lot of Chris's stuff and just kind of recycled a lot of the old Danny Elfman stuff from the first two movies. Sam said, I don't know. He said, let me think about it. And then the next day he emailed me and he said, I really don't want to do it, but he said, if you want to do it, go ahead. But he said, I don't want them to call it the director's cut. We'll just tell them, I'll do it if we can call it the editor's cut, so you can take the blame for it. And I said, fine. It's like, I said, look, we all feel it's a better version of the movie. So I think it's our duty, if we have the opportunity, if the studio is actually, after all these years, going to let us do it, I think we should do it. And he goes, okay, just don't tell me anything about it. They'll just call it the editor's cut and go ahead and do whatever you want to do. So yeah, but it really wasn't an editor's cut. What it really actually was just an older, what I thought was a better version of the movie. Could never be perfect because, the script was so compromised even before we started shooting because of like a lot of bad ideas of putting, Venom in at the last minute and all this other stuff. But I did feel that there was a better version of the movie with better scenes and better sequencing than what got released in theaters. So that's sort of the story behind the editor's cut, so-called editor's cut.
Backtracking just a little bit, I was really curious, what was it like working with John Woo on Hard Target? Working
with John was great. So after I did Army of Darkness, the next thing Sam was doing was producing this John Woo movie and Hard Target. And I was a huge John Woo fan. Better Tomorrow 1 and 2, The Killers, Hard Boiled. I mean, I loved all of his Hong Kong movies. Never dreamed I would get an opportunity to work with him, but then just coincidentally, for whatever reason, Sam and Rob Tapper were producing his American film debut. So Sam said, well, love for you to be able to edit it. Why don't you meet me with John and see if you guys hit it off? So I met with John and we hit it off and I got hired to do the movie. And it was an amazing experience during shooting. I mean, shooting down in New Orleans, and the script wasn't the greatest, but it starred Jean-Claude Van Damme, which was okay, but he's no Chow Yun-Fat. That was a big problem. But still, but the supporting cast was incredible. I mean, Lance Henriksen, Wilford Brimley, just a lot of the side characters I thought were really great, and of course with John's direction and the staging of the action sequences was just phenomenal. But the problem was Jean-Claude. I mean, he felt he was the creative force behind the movie when it was really a John Woo movie. It ended up becoming like a very disappointing experience because, we had a movie that I thought was actually a really cool, stylish John Woo movie that really felt like something John had made. But it was another one of these situations where the studio didn't really understand the stylistic stuff. They hired John because they knew he was a popular Hong Kong filmmaker, but I don't think they really knew about or cared about his stylistic stuff. Jean-Claude was a real bully and really wanted to, take over the movie. And unfortunately, at that point, he had, the producers kept telling me, I don't know what you've heard about Jean-Claude because he's known for taking over the editing of his movies, which apparently he had done a lot on a lot of the canon movies he had done. But they said, if we just want to let you know that this is a John Woo movie, and if Jean-Claude if you see him within 100 yards of the editing room, just, call us and we'll have security remove him from the lot. And I said, okay, yeah, fine. Yeah, that's great because, I'm totally into protecting the movie, and it should be a John Woo movie. But then one day, Jean-Claude signed a 3-picture deal with Universal to do, 3 more movies. And suddenly, the very next day, I got a call and they said, "Hey, Jean-Claude's coming to the editing room. He wants to, see the movie. And he has a lot of ideas, and really wants to try some things." But I mean, even then, they said, "Look, just entertain him, try his ideas. If you like them, do them. If not, don't. But we really need to placate this guy because." He's the star of the movie and really wants to be involved in the editing, which was totally counter to everything that they had said prior. And what happened was, John Woo ended up just becoming totally marginalized, and Jean-Claude ended up taking over the movie. It just became a miserable experience because there was really, it was me trying to fight for John's stuff, and at the same time, Jean-Claude was working with another editor at Universal. I mean, it was the old days when we were cutting on film, and so they actually made a copy of the film print, and they were working on a different copy of the film, cutting on film, and just doing a lot of things that were basically ruining the movie that I didn't agree with, and John didn't agree with, and he just ended up getting pushed out, and they sort of took it over that way. It became it just became a situation where, we had a movie that was I thought pretty good. It could have never been great given, the star of the movie and, it was sort of a B movie script, but I think it could have been a lot better, but they just ended up ruining a lot of it, mostly just taking out a lot of John's stylistic stuff. The studio didn't like, and our test audiences, had a weird and negative reaction to, or didn't understand it. And, like a lot of things, if things are different in the movie, you get a weird response from a test audience. It doesn't mean that they hate it. It just means that, they were just confused by it or not into it or whatever. But, it was just a really bad, weird political situation, and I think the movie ended up getting pretty trashed as a result. It was disappointing. And then we had a lot of ratings problems. We had to go at 8 times to get an R rating, which is absurd when you think about it, because it was to give a movie like that, basically an X rating, NC-17. So it was cutting out all the blood squibs, and then even then we had to go in 6 more times to get the rating. So it was a different time. I mean, the kind of stuff that we were having to cut then, you could get away with in a PG-13 movie now or on a TV show. I mean, it was so absurd. It got to the point where I was cutting out muzzle flashes. I was on the phone with the head of the MPAA, and he said, it's all right if somebody shoots somebody twice or 2, maybe 3 times, but he said anything beyond that we feel is excessive. We'll give you an NC-17. Because at that point, all the blood squibs were gone. So I was having to go in and actually trim out muzzle, gunshots. And somebody like John Woo, where he has somebody shooting, with 2 guns. I mean, it was insane to think that a shot of a muzzle flash was creating essentially an X rating for a movie. That was a really tough process to be involved with.
Has there ever been a release of that is close to what you saw?
They let us do what they called a international version, and we actually made, before they cut the negative, we made dupe copies of everything that was being butchered down, and so we could have an extended version pre-MPAA, pre-Jean-Claude, pre a lot of stuff, and we did a full sound mix finished and completed it, and it was supposed to be the version that got released internationally, but then I think they decided that they didn't want to spend the money to actually take it to the final step. So it was like weirdly like lip service to John Woo that they even did it, I think, in a weird way. I don't know if it ever came out anywhere like that. I mean, it could, because it was definitely prepared, but I don't know if it did. You know, there's a few bootleg versions of the movie floating around, or like early cuts that we had from some of our one of our test screenings. Somehow one of the tapes got out. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a movie that's, right for restoration and reconstruction. But like I said, it's never going to be a perfect movie or a great movie, but I think it could be, like maybe be elevated from a C- to like a B- or something,
Yeah, I mean, and for me, it felt like such a natural to have Sam producing a John Woo film, just the style stuff.
Oh yeah, totally. But again, two guys who the studio like really walked all over in their earlier movies. I mean, the kind of stuff that we were going through on Hard Target was the same kind of stuff that, we went through on Darkman, where they were making Sam cut out things that they thought were too stylish or outrageous or funny or over the top or whatever. They always talk about these tone issues, that they think it's the wrong tone. I think things are a lot better now than they used to be, but, back then studios didn't like when you mix genres. If you had funny things in a horror movie that they needed to be taken out, or if they thought things were too stylistic or with the slow, John's slow motion and dissolves and those kind of things, there was always this negative reaction and feeling that it had to be pulled out to make the movie more acceptable to audiences. It's this least common denominator style of filmmaking, where they would rather have 95% of the movie think it was, good, than 30% thinking it was great, 20% thinking that, and 20% thinking that it was horrible, and then 50% sort of falling in the middle. So this desire to please everybody that ends up really like pleasing nobody. It just becomes this watered down product. Fortunately, I think things have changed a lot, which is good.
You're no stranger to film restoration. I mean, you've been working. How long has Grindhouse been around?
It's been around over 20 years. I think we formed it in 1995. Sage and I, Sage Stallone, who was my partner at the time, formed the company Grindhouse Releasing because we loved movies and we wanted to see these kind of Italian, horror movies and B movies that we loved get a plus quality, release. Like Criterion level releases for movies that people historically didn't care about and had only been released in the worst possible transfers and from the worst elements and by people who never cared about them and butchered them and changed the music and changed the credits and cut time out of them just for the sake of making it shorter and, just viewed the stuff as product, and we were trying to rectify that. I mean, now of course there's a lot of different companies that are doing it, and doing a great job. Everybody from, Synapse to Vinegar Syndrome to Severin to, Shout Factory. But at the time we were doing it, nobody else was really that interested in these kind of movies. So that's why we really wanted to do it, because we love the movies and really wanted to see them get a great presentation for the first time.
I don't imagine you ever had to work on a project that was as scattered as Other Side of the Wind.
I worked on a movie called Gone with the Pope, which was directed by Duke Mitchell. It's great. But it was very similar circumstance to Other Side of the Wind. It was a movie that was made in the mid-'70s, shot really low budget, only partially edited, never finished. The director died before the movie was finished, and it was had never been completed or released in any form. A lot of the same kind of technical problems, bad sound, film that was like in not great condition, lack of documentation in what the intentions were of scenes, and in terms of the script, not having the director around to be there to work with. So that movie, when Sage and I got it back in the mid-'90s, we ended up not finishing it until 2010. So that was a really long-term project. I mean, it wasn't Other Side of the Wind where I was working on it full time, but I was, working on it between shows. So it's funny because when I think back, I had an editing room set up in my garage and a film editing room, and I was working on weekends on Gone with the Pope. And at the same time, 3 houses down, Gary Graver was in his garage working on the other side of the wind because he was putting things together and putting reels together and putting presentations together, taking them around, trying to raise financing to get the movie finished. And at that point, I guess both movies were sort of being worked on simultaneously, even back in 2005 or whatever it was. But yeah, I mean, having done that, I mean, that was like a full-on restoration project like this one. It was a unfinished movie that we took to completion, made film prints, and actually, I think turned out pretty well. For me, that was like a good experience that I actually mentioned to Frank Marshall when, I got interviewed for this show. I said, look, I've kind of done a similar thing already with this movie, Gone with the Pope. Dealing with that kind of stuff, all the stuff that I do in the Grindhouse Releasing movies, we're always, trying to restore things and deal with bad elements and make them better and fix up the sound and deal with like not so great source material, trying to make it as good as possible, using the same techniques and tools and to clean things up. It gave me a really good foundation to work on the Orson Welles movie as well.
How did you get involved with An American Hippie in Israel? Before I came out to LA, when I got out of college, I went to work for a film distributor in Detroit. He was really a sub-distributor, and he had an office in Birmingham, Michigan. A guy named Bob Mason. He had a company called Mason Releasing Corporation, and he handled drive-in movies, exploitation films. Of course, I was, again, like with Gary Graver, I love exploitation movies, so to go to work for a guy who was, at that point, he had Demons in the theaters and Gates of Hell and, Invasion of the Blood Farmers, and I mean, he had all these movies that, I loved. I mean, I was obsessed with. And here was the guy in Detroit who basically booked him in all the Detroit drive-ins, drive-ins like the Fort Wyoming and the Van Dyke Drive-In, and even the drive-in where I was from, up in Bad Axe, Michigan, the M53 Drive-In. So Bob Mason, this guy Bob Mason, had hundreds of prints in shipping depots around the Detroit area. Some in Detroit, some in like Cleveland, some in Cincinnati. Hundreds of movies that he had distributed over the years. So when I was working for him, I said, we should try to get everything in one place. And we rented a warehouse in Pontiac, Michigan, and I drove around the Midwest one summer just picking up all the film prints, 35 millimeter prints, and getting them all into our one central warehouse. And one of the movies was this movie called American Hippie in Israel that he had. And it was so bizarre. I had never heard of it because I really consider myself to be an expert on a lot of these exploitation movies, even back then. And it was a movie that just seemed like nobody knew anything about. I mean, this was all pre-internet, and it was just so obscure. And I talked to Bob about it, and he goes, yeah, it's this great movie that I picked up like years ago. And he said, I really loved the movie, and I really thought we could play midnight shows, and it was so unusual and funny and weird and quirky, and he said, but nobody ever wanted to see it. He said, I don't think I ever got a single booking. He said, I got the movie, I showed it to all the theater owners, and everybody just, they wouldn't even show it as a midnight show, or I couldn't even get it booked into a drive-in. He goes, everybody thought it was so bad. He goes, but he said, but I always loved the movie, and I always thought that someday something could happen with it, and people would discover it. When I moved up to California, one year I went back to Michigan for Christmas, and I went and saw my old friend Bob, the distributor, and I said, I was thinking about that movie American Hippie, and he goes, well, if you want to, let's try to do something with it. So I took one reel of it back in my suitcase. I took reel 5 back to Hollywood with me, and I screened it, and I just thought it was like incredible. I couldn't believe how great it was. So I had him ship me the entire print, and for years we talked about trying to do something, and we got to transfer it at one point, and just had always talked about doing something with it, and then finally I ended up getting. And all this was like like Grindhouse Releasing. I didn't really have a distribution company, but then when Sage and I formed Grindhouse, I always thought we should finally try to do something with American Hippie in Israel. So the first thing I did was I put together a trailer. I cut a trailer together. We started putting it on all of our releases just to try to generate some interest in the movie. And what happened was somebody pulled it off of one of our DVDs, A Drink Your Blood or whatever had come out at the time, and uploaded it onto YouTube, and it became like, I don't know if I would call it viral or whatever, but it started to really get this cult following. Then some guys in Tel Aviv just kind of became obsessed with the movie.
one of the guys, a guy named Yaniv, who's since become a friend of mine, became like super obsessed with the movie because they felt in Israel they had never really had like a cult movie before. So he found a print in the film archives in, I think, Jerusalem or Tel Aviv or something. They got a print and started running it as midnight shows, and it became like almost like a Rocky Horror Picture Show in Tel Aviv when they were running it. It just became so popular. People were like dressing up like the characters. People knew all the dialogue. They were throwing things at the screen, and it just became this like midnight cult movie, all because of this stupid trailer that I had put together. So anyway, that really kind of opened the floodgates, because then I was able to find he was able to find the actors for me, and we shot interviews with everybody. People who had worked on the movie, the production manager. I mean, all these people. The son of the director, I became friends with him, and then finally, it went from a movie where I didn't know how I would ever release it, to having a company, Grindhouse Releasing, to ending up having like this huge amount of like materials, like all these interviews, and to be able to put out a really super deluxe Blu-ray edition. It really blossomed into something that I thought was really cool.
I don't want to put you on the spot, and you might remember this, you might not, but I've seen two different versions of that film as far as the ending goes.
Yeah, there's a version called The Hitchhiker, and actually, that was the version that they had at the film archives in Israel, and that's the version they were showing. I actually got them to transfer it for me, and we included it as a bonus disc on our first release. We did a 3-disc set, and the third disc was that Hitchhiker version. It was pretty bad quality because it was, a really scratched up print, and it had burned in subtitles, and the transfer that those guys did was pretty poor, but I really wanted to preserve that version, which had that weird version, that shot at the end where the car flies away. And of course, the guys in Israel, when I released the Blu-ray, they really wanted me to put that into our version of the movie. Actually, I wanted to, but I thought, I had been to screenings where like the abrupt ending of the American version got such a huge reaction that I really wanted to preserve both versions. Because the way the American version ends, where just like suddenly the guys, the two mimes get into the car, and then it just cuts to this really shaky shot that says the end. I've been in screenings where people just like go crazy because it's so abrupt. So, but yeah, there are two slightly different versions, and actually the Israeli version has a few more things, like the mimes killing all the hippies with the machine guns, and there's a few things that are longer. I think the sex scenes go on a little bit longer, and some things like that.
Well, what is going on with Grindhouse these days? Are you working on any releases?
Yeah, we're working on a few cool things. Our next release is going to be this really great Umberto Lenzi, who is the director of Cannibal Ferox, a.k.a. Make Them Die Slowly. He directed a series of police movies in the 70s. They were kind of like Dirty Harry ripoffs. There was a huge subgenre of police movies in Italy, inspired by Dirty Harry and Serpico and those kind of American movies. He did a great one called Roma a Mano Armata, which was the Italian title, which was released in the U.S. as Assault with a Deadly Weapon, a.k.a. Brutal Justice, a.k.a. The Tough Ones, which was the English language title that we had on our Elements. So The Tough Ones, which is a great Italian crime, really violent in the tradition of Lenzi, but really energetic, has great performances from Maurizio Merli and Tomas Milian, who's incredible, and Franco Nicolizzi score, but just really, Lenzi always said that he was always kind of ashamed of the cannibal movies that he was known for, and he always was like most proud of the police movies. And it's a really great, entertaining, energetic, violent movie. So I'm excited about that one. It was always one of Sage's favorite movies, and we never really got it together while he was alive. But so I'm glad to finally be getting that one out. And then we've got another movie called Scum of the Earth, a.k.a. Poor White Trash Part 2, directed by S.F. Brownrigg, who made Don't Look in the Basement. Kind of a, backwoods hillbilly exploitation movie. 70s, really ugly, grimy, dirty, sleazy, but entertaining, really well acted, well directed, well written, but really downbeat and like a real dingy, dirty, backwoods, movie. We've been working on that one for a while, just amassing a lot of really great material, interviews, and we'll probably be releasing it in conjunction with a book about S.F. Brownrigg and the whole Texas filmmaking scene from the time. My partner on that is David Shulkin, who wrote the Last House on the Left book, The Making of Last House on the Left. It's phenomenal. So he's been writing this incredible book about this whole Texas filmmaking scene. They'll probably come out in conjunction with one another. But the cool thing about Poor White Trash Part 2 is it has never really been released on DVD or Laserdisc or anything. It was released on VHS years ago, but never really got much of a release and hasn't really been seen since. So it'll be cool to get that out again. And a few other things, some other movies that we've had for years, like Death Game, and yeah.
Did you hear that Sandra Locke just passed away?
No, you're kidding me.
Yeah, I just saw it come up on Twitter.
Oh no, I was just talking about with the DP yesterday, and we were going to get in touch with her. Oh no, that's terrible.
I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news.
No, that's horrible, because I didn't know it, and I thought, well, the great thing, unlike so many of these other movies, the great thing about Death Game is like everybody's still around. Colleen Camp, Sandra Locke, Seymour Cassell. I mean, all the leads are still with us. The director's still alive. David Worth, the DP, the writer, and I just thought it was a great opportunity to have such a comprehensive package. Have you heard what happened?
No, I just have seen her name coming up on Twitter, and I was like, what is this? And sure enough, she passed away.
Oh, what a shame. Oh, it's so sad. I mean, so much of this stuff is like just timing, with these old movies, just like being able to get the stuff done, as soon as you can. I mean, it's like, when we were doing the Tough Ones, the Lenzi movie, while we were preparing it the last year, Lenzi passed away. Luckily, Umberto Lenzi, we got an interview with him about, I think, less than a month before he died, which I'm glad we did, because we got a really comprehensive entire career retrospective interview with him, which I thought was really important to have. And then Tomas Milian, who's great actor, studio trained actor, who was in so many of these great Italian movies and is such an incredible actor, died last year as well. I mean, we shot an interview with him for Big Gun Down, but we were actually getting ready to do something again with him. He lived in Miami, and then found out he had, right like a week before we were going to try to do something, he passed away.
Well, what is the next big show for you?
I don't know. I don't really have anything lined up right now. I mean, I've been waiting for Sam to do another picture, but he's had a couple of things in pre-production that have fallen through or whatever, and hopefully he has some cool things in the hopper that we can work together on at some point. I'm definitely working with him is my first and foremost priority. So,
well, it must have been nice working with him again on Ash vs. Evil Dead.
It was incredible to work on that show. All those years after Army of Darkness to go to New Zealand, which was weird because it was supposed to be like Michigan. But yeah, to be able to work with Rob and Rob Tappert and Bruce Campbell and Sam all together again, it was something. I mean, it was great. Sam was just it was just like old times. Look, I love Evil Dead 1. I mean, before I ever met Sam, I was a huge fan of Evil Dead. It was a movie that I saw in East Lansing, Michigan on opening day at the campus theater, and with like me and like two people in the audience, and just loved it. Yeah, I mean, to be able to work on Army of Darkness was great, and then of course the Evil Dead show. It's really a great experience.
And that pilot episode, I mean, that is just amazing.
Good. I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, it was such a different attitude than we were used to, because like all the problems we had in Army of Darkness and studios complaining about tone issues, Stars was just like the opposite. I mean, they greenlit the script. I don't think they really understood the tone at the time. And then when they saw the first cut that we showed them, it was like, wow, we really didn't. I guess we weren't really expecting that, but that was really cool. I don't think they. I think they thought it was going to be like more straightforward horror, but then of course it was like a total Sam movie. When they saw it, they were just like very surprised, but like super supportive, which is great. It's like the opposite of like the old days of working with some of these studios.